Well, hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I am so thrilled for the conversation we're about to have. I'm also equally inspired by just seeing the chat and knowing where all of you are joining us from. Welcome from all over the world. My name is Jenny Maxwell, and I am the General Manager for the Education team here at Grammarly. And I'm really excited to be having a conversation today with Dr. C. Edward Watson, who I get to affectionately call Eddie. Eddie, would you like to come off and introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello, everyone. I'm Eddie Watson. I am the Vice President for Digital Innovation at the American Association of Colleges and Universities, also known as AAC&U.
Welcome. We're so excited today. We're going to evaluate the first full academic year together with generative AI, discuss the biggest lessons that we've learned, and then shift our focus to the future and discuss how to develop a plan for the upcoming school year. We're going to begin in just a few minutes. Before we do, just a few items of housekeeping. Because of the size of this webinar, we automatically mute everybody, but you're able to ask questions if you just engage in the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. We're happy to take questions. We've also had hundreds of questions submitted prior to this event today, so we're going to try to spend time at the end to make sure we address some of the more common questions. To enable closed captioning, click the CC button at the bottom of your webinar, pictured here. And then we're going to be using Slido for audience participation throughout the webinar. To join, you're going to enter you're going to scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the chat. Because we want this to be interactive. We want to hear your thoughts throughout. So lastly, don't worry about taking any notes today. We will be sending out a recorded copy of the event, so you won't miss a thing. So with that, I want to start off with just a retro, looking back in the last 9 to 12 months. We've seen a lot of headlines around generative AI. Gen AI seemed to affect every aspect of higher education for students and staff and faculty. And before we dive into our discussion, let's look back at some of the top headlines that educators and administrators had to make sense of this year. So academic integrity. Almost as soon as Gen AI entered campuses, institutions had to develop policies, not to just use it for education, but manage it, detect it, and have a perspective on what appropriate use was. We saw assessment and grading come up. The effectiveness of Gen AI heightened all of our concerns when it started completing traditional assignments as well, or even better than what we would expect of our students. Privacy and security came up. And while the future of the learning experience has taken center stage, institutions have been required to navigate privacy and security concerns, just like every other business adopting new technology. And then the future of work. One of the biggest things that the education community has been grappling with is how to best prepare students for this AI-connected workforce while preserving the fundamental building blocks of learning. And then admission processes were affected. This was the first year that colleges had to develop a philosophy on what to do about AI-generated and AI-assisted admission essays. These handful of news stories is a lot, and it only represents just a snapshot of the complexity of higher ed that professionals here are having to navigate. And to underscore just how fast things are moving in this space, just yesterday, OpenAI made a major announcement that they have a new GPT model that leverages more multimodal voice and image functionality that delivers stepwise improvement on individual tutoring and assistive support. The bottom line is that the tech will always continue to outpace our collective ability to adjust and adopt. So it's imperative that the education sector stays abreast of the AI landscape and understands how to adjust in the best interest of both faculty and students. Today, we're not going to just answer all the questions, but with expert insights of Dr. Watson, this session is intended to offer a few answers and, more importantly, better frame these questions so educators can approach them head on this coming year. All right, I gave a brief and incomplete snapshot of some of the major themes around AI this past year. with the extensive research you've done for your new book, shown here. And you have one of the most informed perspectives on this topic, Eddie. What would you see as the major theme across education from this past year in relation to generative AI technology?
Well, excellent question. And first off, Jenny, thanks to you and Cliff and your colleagues for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I think this is maybe our third or fourth conversation, and each of the earlier ones could have certainly been the webinar. So I'm hoping that this one has similar quality and is equally interesting. So most important themes. Well, I think that the first semester, so spring 2023, we were just learning that this existed and that students were using it. It was mostly sort of like a reaction that then led into the fall of like, okay, so what do we do to kind of keep it at bay? How do we keep AI out of the classroom? We already have courses that, work pretty well to achieve certain learning outcomes for our students. So it was initially sort of like, how do we protect what we are currently doing? A number of different strategies kind of emerged there. One was around AI detection. If we had a technology that could war with students' technology, then maybe we don't change anything in our classes. That was sort of like one initial instinct. But how do we sort of protect what we've got in our own classes? And I think for me, it's kind of been the metaphor of like, us fighting with the kids in the back seat in the car, and we're sort of like waving at the kids while we're trying to keep doing what we've been doing as they've got this new thing that they're working with. But at the same time as we're sort of doing that in our own car driving down the interstate, another car passed us, and that was the world of work, where employers are rapidly adopting across all business sectors generative AI. In fact, a survey from late last year, so late 2023, from Amazon World Services interviewed or surveyed employers from all business sectors, not just IT. And they found that nearly all of them, 93%, said that they've either already adopted generative AI or they see across a timeline horizon that they will be adopting generative AI. So I'm going to create a little bit of a false binary here regarding sort of these core themes, but one instinct is we want to continue to ensure that our students achieve the learning outcomes that they need within our courses. So how do we sort of keep AI at bay? But now another car has passed us on the interstate that we have to pay attention to, and this other car is requiring that we actually infuse our curriculum with AI skills, AI learning outcomes, AI literacies. So again, a bit of a false binary, but how do we preserve and ensure students continue to achieve the learning outcomes that we have for our courses, while also ensuring that they have this new skill set that is rapidly required in the world of work?
Well, and I love the metaphor so much. We have a unique perspective at Grammarly because we work with over 3,000 global institutions in higher ed, but we also work with over 70,000 teams in the Fortune 1000. And so we're able to see kind of what's happening in real time on the education side, and then know explicitly what our business partners are saying they are demanding of their employees and their people who want to go work at their companies. And so we feel like if I can extend on this metaphor, Grammarly's somebody that both cars are asking for direction. And one of those cars is, I would say, is not even a car anymore. I feel like the world of work is now quickly approaching like a bullet train, if you will, and how quickly they're adapting and what their expectations are for their employees. So love that. We spent a lot of time thinking about resistant to change. I think part of that is just human behavior, like denial, acceptance, grief, all those stages we went through. I'd love some perspective for you because, it's no surprise and secret that Grammarly was brought into the plagiarism and AI detection conversation at the sort of expense of a student, and there are many more students like her. So I'd love your perspective on this AI plagiarism detection sort of knee-jerk reaction that we saw in the last academic year. What do you think about it?
Well, I guess I have 2 points of recommendation for campuses that are considering AI detection. One is short and one is long. So the short one is I recommend that you don't use it. And so the long answer has a lot of components associated with it. One is around the notion of all of these tools have some rate of false positive. In other words, a student did not use AI to generate student work, they turn it in, and then it gets falsely flagged. And then a faculty member is then, it's a black box. You don't really know what it's scoring against or how it's scoring. So you're told by the technology, this student indeed cheated using AI. So then you take steps forward with that student who was falsely accused. So that's a real problematic scenario. There's also the notion of false negatives. So in other words, so let's say I did cheat using AI, but then the tool doesn't catch it, it lets me through. So you might question, well, who gets through the net then? Is it the student who is paying for access to the latest tool? So, someone that's paying $20 a month to have access to Claude 3 Opus? Or is it the student that's using a free tool? And so if you think, well, who's most likely to subscribe or pay $20 a month for an AI? Is it your Pell eligible students or your more affluent students? So more than likely, the students that are going to get away or that are going to be not flagged whenever they should have been flagged, those false negatives, are the affluent students. So do we really want to have a tool that has some inequities built within it that are against those that are already less commonly served by our educational institutions? Probably
Yep.
not. But I think also if we take a step back and we look, well, what is the scope of the problem? I mean, as I go from campus to campus and have conversations, I had about a month ago, a first year writing instructor who's also, it was her first year teaching. So, she came to me and she said, I think all of my students are cheating. I think every last one of them are using AI. And I said, why do you think that? And she said, well, the papers all sound the same. And I said, well, you are teaching a bunch of 17-year-olds. So it's possible that they sound a lot alike because most of your students are at a similar stage in writing. But, her intuition isn't entirely wrong, but research shows that professors, we get it right about 54% of the time. We're able to recognize AI produced writing about the flip of a coin. So we're not really good at this. So when asked, do AI detectors work? Well, AI detectors are probably better than us, but they do have this whole notion of false positives and false negatives that really should call into question whether or not we want to further exacerbate student mental health challenges on our campuses, where in fact there's other strategies available for us. So just one thought down this line is, well, how pervasive is this problem? And there is a bit of a moral panic. This faculty member, this instructor from a month ago that said, I think all of my students are cheating. And certainly some of the AI detection tools out there are trying to sort of accelerate and expand that view. But it was interesting, a press release last month from turnitin.com heralded their 1-year anniversary of AI detection. And they said that they had reviewed over 200 million pieces of student writing. And within that giant sample of student writing, 22 million had been flagged for using AI to write 20% or more of the paper. So at 22 million out of 200 million, that's like 10 or 11%. So in a class of 30, we're talking about 3 students that actually turn in work produced by AI. So this isn't all of your students are cheating or even half of your class is cheating. It's a much smaller percentage. And so there's a lot of pedagogical approaches, structural approaches that we could take within our courses that could help students make the right decision. That's really one of the core foci within the book is how can we sort of nudge, from 3 students to maybe 2 students make poor decisions, maybe then just 1 student make a poor decision. Again, in a class of 30 is my example. But yeah, given the scope of challenge around AI detection and the student mental health crisis, and also just the ongoing decline of Americans' perception of confidence in higher education, I don't think that we're doing right by our students or by our institutions by using AI detection as a solution to this particular challenge, especially given that it is a 10 or 11% challenge, not a all of my students cheating kind of challenge.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And you and I could just riff on the look back for the entire time, but in the interest of offering future ready solutions, we're going to pivot a little bit. Before we do, I want to transition to the forward looking conversation, but I also want to temperature check with the audience. So I want to know how everyone is currently feeling about tackling this upcoming year with Gen AI. Now, granted, this is the sort of before the conversation temperature check. But go ahead and join us on through Slido. And in just one word, pick your word, one word. I have to tell everybody just one, how you're describing about the upcoming school year. And then if everything works out as you type your words in, we should see these words populate into a word cloud here on Zoom, which great, it's working. Okay, love this. I don't know about you, Eddie, but I am like an eternal optimist. I believe that humans are inherently good. And I think that most of the conversations, at least from where I sit at Grammarly, most of the administrators and the faculty, we've moved out of the fear side of generative AI, and we have really quickly pivoted more on the fascination about how AI can really force education to become more creative, for these assessments to reflect a higher level thinking than just writing as an assessment of learning. So I love seeing this come up. So to our audience, thank you for coming into the conversation open-minded. That's what some of these words kind of bring out to me. I don't know, Eddie, if you have any commentary on this and what you're seeing on a larger scale as you have conversations, but are
Well,
you
I really
feeling?
like seeing that excited is the main word. I think that there are a lot of reasons to be hopeful and optimistic about what AI might bring to higher education. And, whenever I cited that statistic of, 10 or 11% of students turning in work produced by AI, it's certainly a far higher percentage of students that are using AI in really creative ways. Like as an example, like if a student gets your assignment and gets your rubric for how you're going to grade that assignment, and they upload it into an AI and ask, hey, this is going to be a 5-page paper. Can you provide me with an outline of this paper? And then I'll write it all myself, but provide me with an outline. I guess one question is that cheating? Or, asking for feedback after you wrote it and then maybe make revisions. Again, it's all your own writing. Is that examples of cheating? But when you think about it, they're both helpful. They'll both result in a better product. The student's doing the work, and it actually mirrors what's likely to take place in the real world. I think that sometimes what we call cheating in higher ed, business calls progress. So I
Yeah.
think, recognizing students are using it broadly, but maybe not cheating in the traditional definition of like, hey, it did the paper for me and then I turn it in. There's lots of creative ways that it's being used. So I think that most students are excited about it, and I think that we should be too.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And giving the autonomy back to the individual faculty member to decide what they're willing to bear. And maybe that's going to vary per assignment, or it's going to vary at a certain point throughout the course or the learning journey of each individual student. There's just a lot that we get to, I love that I get to bear witness to what I will believe to be a true sort of renaissance of teaching because of the tool. Like I've been in the space for a long time, and it's just exciting for me to watch who is going to step forward and do things dramatically differently, and what the outcomes are going to be. So broadening things, let's think about the imperatives for faculty in higher ed institutions as a whole to incorporate AI more thoughtfully across the curriculum. Your book specifically devotes a considerable portion to the changing nature of work as a result of generative AI. What are the biggest changes happening in the workforce as a result of AI that you see?
Well, I think maybe the biggest challenge, or not necessarily challenge, but the biggest change that I'm seeing is that it's broadly adopted across so many different business sectors, not just within the IT world, and it's being used not just for language production, but also code production, computer code, for instance. But just every sector is finding creative, interesting new ways to use it. In fact, my family care physician, who has always been a very much sort of heads down, he rolls in with the laptop on a little cart. He's always head down typing away. And while he's talking to me, he's great. I love our family physician, but he's now piloting a new system where he rolls in with the same cart, but actually he turns and talks to me. And it's listening, And his role isn't to be typing in insurance codes and taking notes the whole time. It's providing a draft for him that then he reviews at the end. So ultimately, he reviews, he makes sure it's all accurate, he makes changes, all of that kind of stuff. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that we're seeing a change in the way that work is
Mhm.
looking, the way those tasks look, and it's actually changing the way that we think. Like the way that you can see, like in this example I just gave, you see the patient, not the technology, and the patient sees the doctor, not the technology. It becomes something that's more in the background, still assisting and aiding. But as I think about the whole that shift, it harkens me back to being 9 years old and seeing Dr. Hall whenever I was a kid, and actually the whole entire interaction was all face to face. And over time, that's been eroded. So I'm really hopeful that a lot of these shifts will take on tedious tasks across a range of different career sectors, take care of the tedious task, and then we can actually do the things that humans do best and the things that we enjoy more. So I feel hopeful that it's actually going to result in maybe many of us being happier in our work lives as a result of the kinds of things that it can do for us.
I love the irony of that story, right? Where the technology adoption actually helps us go back to our lives and sort of engagement with one another before technology, right? Like think about what the doctor's offices look like of yesteryear, and imagining, like, let's take that metaphor and actually, or not metaphor, but that example, and say, think about what a student could go through, right? Like those office hours conversations, those engagements that faculty have to have. They teach hundreds of students, and they're not able to, prior to this technology, maybe have the level of engagement on a per student basis that now we might be able to unlock. I mean, do you foresee this transferring into the direct faculty student relationship?
I do think that there are those possibilities. I think for all faculty, we can look at our work from one week to the next, and there are things that we really enjoy doing, and then there are things that maybe we don't enjoy doing so much. Like we're at the end of the semester on many campuses, and I bet a lot of people participating in this webinar are writing lots of letters of recommendation right now. And probably one approach that you have for that is you have a letter that you wrote in the past. And so whenever you have to write a new letter for a student, you take that old template and then you revise it. And, then you have like, the 3 paragraphs in the middle or where you're really writing about the student. Getting a draft of a letter. Typically whenever I would have a student ask me for a letter, I would say, can you send me like three or four bullets that you would like for me to emphasize? And then, of course, I decide whether or not I agree that those are things I want to emphasize. No, you were not the greatest student I had of all time, but thank you for that thought. So, anyways, you've got this bulleted list. Now you can go to AI and say, hey, here's a letter I've written in the past, change the name to this student's name and highlight, emphasize these strengths. And so then you get a draft, and then you can edit the draft, of course. I mean, while AI might produce this letter, I'm responsible for the final product. I'm the lead author, so I take full responsibility for whatever I do then send forward. But to be able to cut time off of the writing process, and then I review and revise and maybe add in a little anecdote, instead of maybe the process of writing the letter taking 20 to 30 minutes, maybe you cut 50% of that time off, which means that you then have, well, capacity to recharge yourself or capacity to engage more in course planning, or what does it enable whenever you no longer have to do as many of the tedious tasks, and then you can then lean into the things that maybe you really enjoy, whether you're at an R1 and you need to focus more on research, or whether you have a large teaching load as an instructor. If you didn't have to do some of those tedious pieces, now you can lean into the parts of your work that you enjoy the most.
And I think that there's no shortage of faculty who really want to start enjoying more of their work life. So we don't need a word cloud to say yes or no if you agree. I know that that is definitively true, and not just faculty, but everyone right now being able to do more of what we love so that we as human beings can overall feel more motivated and excited about our purpose. So love all of that. I want to kind of go back to students. So knowing that the world of work is this bullet train, and certainly from our perspective, I think we worked with Forrester, and when we did this poll back in 2023, it was 97% of companies that were polled will have a definitive AI strategy by 2025, which is, you know, in about 7 months. What do you think that these workforce changes, what kind of implication do they have for students graduating in the next 1 to 5, 7 years?
Yeah, that's a real interesting time frame. I mean, I think that higher education, K-12 education, all educational institutions, we have a variety of purposes, but without a doubt, one of our purposes is to prepare students for life after they leave the institution. And part of that life will indeed be the world of work. So, I think right now as higher ed is figuring out how to position themselves with policies and strategies around academic integrity. And I think those are important things for us to be working toward. I think we're on a train that's on multiple rails right now. And like, yes, we need to be doing policy and academic integrity work, but we also need to recognize that, we had students that just graduated. Do we feel that they're ready for this world that has quickly emerged? How might we position ourselves so that our rising seniors, those that graduate a year from today, essentially, how can we position our work and position our curricula and the practices within our courses to prepare those graduates for jobs that are going to exist within a year? That's a real heavy lift,
Yeah,
given where we currently are as an industry, to make those kinds of rapid changes, especially given that we're talking about a sliver of the curriculum. We're
yeah,
talking about the senior year, the 4,000 level courses. And is
yeah,
that the appropriate place to have this placed? Maybe it should be in all capstone courses, but these are the kinds of questions that we need to think through to prepare those students. I
yeah,
think I wish the challenge was, how do we prepare our incoming freshmen for the world that awaits them when they graduate in 4 to 6 years? How do we, that would give us time to do the curricular revision really thoughtfully and really well. But I don't think that we can divorce ourselves from the students that we currently have on our campus. So it's I think that in the same way that the pandemic created a mission imperative opportunity for centers of teaching and learning in higher education, I think we have again found ourselves in a similar moment that I would argue is even more imperative. That now it's not just about moving a course into an online setting. We're actually drilling back into our curricula to figure out where should we be teaching these skills, often within the discipline. Certainly having some generic AI skills is helpful, but if I'm a nursing student and I'm going to be in the nursing field, I really want to be taught, how is AI being used in the field right now? What am I likely to experience whenever I get a job? Or what skills do I need to indeed get that job? What are employers now looking for? Well, then how do we position those students with the students we currently have? How do we
yeah.
engender those skills along with everything else that we need to still teach them? And this isn't an easy solution, but it's the challenge that we have ahead of us. And I don't think we cannot lean into this coming fall semester. I think this is something that we need to figure out in each department and program in college and university in higher education. We need to have a strategy for how to give students the skills that they rapidly will need just 1 year from now or even less.
This is truly, from my perspective, a call of leadership. And everyone who's joined the webinar, whether you consider yourself a leader or not, you are, by nature of even engaging with us in this conversation today. I know, and Eddie, you do a great job deeply detailing ways to start iterating curriculum, like taking bite-size chunks of this and doing things that are you can action on, that aren't so overwhelming. Do you want to give a little sneak peek about some of those recommendations you have around how to start adjusting curriculum ahead of fall?
Yeah, I think that the first thing, um, unfortunately, I think all educators at the moment have an unfunded mandate to explore and play with AI tools. And this kind of is now part of the job because this world is moving so quickly. As you noted at the top, there's now a new version of Chat GPT for Omni. When I first saw it, I thought it was ominous. So I thought, well, that's the best branding if that's where my eye went first. But it's so anyways, that's changing things, and that's supposed to be, available to everyone. And then there's the world of AI isn't monolithic. There's multiple large language models. So there are tools that have different brains, if you will. So like Claude has a different brain, and Google's Gemini has a different brain, a different model, a different approach. And so they have different strengths and different weaknesses. So knowing when to use which tool in the toolbox is part of what we as faculty need to understand. And we also need to engender that in our students. But of course, these large language models that we talk about, there's many, many, many tools that are now using sort of like pathways, things that are called open APIs, like Chat GPT has a path where you can create your own very focused tool that does a specific task or set of tasks that's using the larger brain from OpenAI. So there's lots of disciplinary focused tools that are using like the Chat GPT brain that we need to know about within our discipline. So I think my summer recommendations are play with the tools, pay a fee to at least for 1 month to have access to the best tool or tools, and then enter your assignments and see what kind of output it gives you. There's a big difference between the free tools and the paid tools. So that's one thing that you should do. I would also recommend that if you have an advisory board for your department or your college, that's probably comprised of employers or past graduates of your institution, reach out to those folks and say, so how has the world changed for you in the last year? What skills are you asking? Are you now writing into job descriptions? What do you expect our graduates to be able to do? I mean, what are you looking for essentially, and how has your work changed? Because without understanding that focused target, you don't know what you're revising your curriculum toward. So that's I think essential work this summer. And then once you sort of now know what the learning outcomes need to be, then it becomes an exercise of curriculum redesign, which we all love curriculum redesign. So as a former CTL director, I'm not joking, I really do, but most people probably don't have the same interest or passion in that notion. But so, okay, you know that students need to know how to do X, Y, and Z with these new tools within your discipline or field. Okay, so where in your curriculum are you going to teach that? Okay, so it's in these three courses. Well, those three faculty who teach those three courses, do they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to work with the AI that's being used in industry that just came about? So there's a whole professional development mechanism that needs to kind of come into play as we situate specific outcomes within the curriculum and then within individual courses. But then how do you actually teach how to use those tools in meaningful ways that, again, complements the other set of learning outcomes that you have in front of you? In fact, this larger challenge, I guess I see this as maybe the higher education pedagogical zeitgeist challenge for us. And at the where I work at the American Association of Colleges and Universities, we are launching an institute on AI pedagogy and the curriculum to help departments and programs, or even colleges or the entire university, rethink this exact question, then help you make that transition. So you would send a team from your program or from your university that would then focus on these issues with us. And we have a group of national experts. But at the aacu.org website, there's a little icon for it. You can't miss it, for the Institute on AI Pedagogy and the curriculum. Though the deadline is 6 days from now. So I encourage you, if this sounds at all of interesting, to have some help with the work I just described. We're certainly positioning ourselves to be the leaders in helping higher ed make that transition.
That's wonderful. And I'll see if someone from our team can also put the link to that in our chat for
Well,
those that
well, how
haven't.
about that?
Yeah, there you go. It'll magically appear. Thank you, technology. Well, we have to honor some time on the Q&A because we had so many questions submitted ahead of today's event, and I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. But before we hop on to take questions, I want to highlight some of the work that Grammarly has been doing to support educators through this transition in the new era of Gen AI. First, just reminder, we've been in the game for 15 years. We've been focusing on topics discussed today from a thought leadership perspective, but also we're deeply committed to product innovation that really supports this work. So today, both students and professionals use Grammarly to write more clearly, confidently, and effectively. Our robust controls allow institutions to set the parameters on how students use generative AI. So you do have granular control, whether there's certain departments or schools that want the generative AI functionality turned on. You have that ability with Grammarly, which is something we're really proud to be able to bring to this market. The other thing too is that Grammarly is contextually aware. So we're able to help students write in both academic settings, emails. We can know where you're writing and offer up suggestions that are relevant to producing great content for that specific workflow. So if you're going to see a poll, if you want to learn more about how Grammarly is moving forward to support both students and institutions and faculty with responsible deployment of generative AI tools, click yes, and someone from the team will get in touch with you. And thank you so much for that. But so I'm going to be bringing on my assistant here, Cliff, not really my assistant, but in this space, I can call him that. And he's going to be able to raise some of the questions that were submitted earlier and that have been submitted throughout today's event so far. So Cliff, please welcome.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, Eddie. Hello, everyone. So I want to start with two questions that came in during the live chat. I'm going to go in reverse order. So just building on some of the points you were making, Eddie, around skill development and trying to be more aligned with the workforce. Charles asks, how do you see the development of baseline skills in this Gen AI context? Do students need to develop general writing, coding, etc. skills before leaning into AI? Is it a joint effort? I think this is getting at some of the pedagogical questions around what baseline skills do you need before you actually leverage generative tools effectively, and how do you develop those in a world where the technology is moving so quickly?
Yeah, so I think that generative AI is like the best thing that could happen to us as individuals, higher ed, or teaching professionals, because we already have all of the expertise. And so when there is a product that is produced by AI, we already have all of the knowledge that we need, the prerequisite skills to be able to further revise, to engage in that human AI hybrid writing process, to provide, a final product that's of exceptional quality. We have the skills that make us good collaborators with AI. Maybe our gen ed students who are new to a specific topic area domain, they don't have the requisite skills that will enable them then to be great thought partners with AI in producing work. So yes, we need to continue to engender those foundational skills. So I think part of the challenge for us then is how do we continue to do that whenever students all have access to AI at this moment? And I think part of it is, I guess one core recommendation is that for every assignment that's given in America, I would say there needs to be an AI policy, not just on your syllabus, on each individual assignment. And it should not only say when you can use AI, it should also say why. So, like, I know that AI does this really, really well, but however, you probably don't yet. And therefore, for this assignment, you're not allowed to use AI because I want you to develop these skills. And then later on this semester or later in the curriculum next semester, that's whenever you're going to be able to lean into a partnership with AI, because then you'll have the prerequisite skills. Without the foundational knowledge, you're not a very good thought partner with AI quite yet. So there's lots of foundational skills that we're going to have to continue to teach. I think that, for instance, writing, it's hard to be a good editor if you don't have, strong writing skills. I think that there's probably shifts that we're going to see in the way that we teach writing, and that part of what we should be teaching now is actually editorial skills. So certainly continue about writing, but there should also be opportunities probably in our freshman English courses to have students act as editor, given that in the real world, that's what writing's going to likely look like outside of maybe creative settings or our scholarship or things like that. But yes, I guess the short answer, and I rarely have short answers, but the short answer is yes, we do need to continue to ensure students achieve those foundational learning outcomes that we previously had aspired for them. But we also need to be engendering how to leverage those skills within the context or using AI. And that's a generalized statement. I mean, as you go from one discipline to the next, and then maybe one specific learning outcome within a discipline to the next, there's certainly going to be scenarios where, well, maybe that's something that we don't need to teach any longer. Like I was a double major in statistics and English, and I was the last generation of student that had columns and columns and rows and rows and rows of numbers that I had to add by hand. When I was a senior, Minitab came on the scene, and then it's like, oh wait, everything I've been doing for 3 years now, the computer does, and I have never, I still do ed research, and I haven't added a row of, rows or a column of numbers since 1994 or whatever it was. So there are some skills that maybe we won't have to do anymore. Some tasks we may not have to do anymore. So I think that each of us within our own curricula will make those decisions. We'll see how the real world is changing. We'll see what AI can do expertly that maybe we can make some decisions. Well, we're going to decrease the amount of instruction around this outcome within our curriculum, and then actually fill in those gaps within the schedule with additional new outcomes that are associated with AI, or how the discipline itself is changing. I mean, curriculum does evolve, and this is just one of the current forces that is bringing us to a moment of rethinking what we're teaching within our courses and why.
Yeah. Just as a plug from previous webinars and content, Charles and others who are curious, if you check out our Grammarly for Education events page, which we can link to in the chat, we have a white paper from March just on the future of writing and that collaborative writing process that Eddie touched on between AI and student, amongst other content that you can find there. So feel free to check that out. One of the other questions that came in during your discussion about academic integrity as part of the look back was challenging you a little bit in a, I think, a helpful way, Eddie, but and Jenny, I want your take on this too. The question is, how do we acknowledge the scope of the academic integrity problem without falling into moral panic? I definitely worry about overselling the scope of the problem, to your point, Eddie, but I worry about underselling it too.
Well, I think that there's we're tuning, aren't we? We're sort of, we need data that provides us with evidence so that we can make solid decisions that are actually addressing the problem. So I think that there's macro level data, like the statistics that were nested within that press release from Turnitin. That's a very large sample, 200 million, and 22 million were flagged with 20% or more AI. So that gives us a sense globally. But what's happening in your particular classroom? I think there's an opportunity to provide to collect data from your own students, to ask questions, to have conversations with it. And without a doubt, students are going to lean toward, mistrusting you. Wait, so you're asking me if I'm cheating? Of course, the answer is no. So there, I think there's opportunities to have, a focus group on your campus, surveys that are anonymous, and knowing that students are going to underreport, but you can still grab a snapshot. I mean, a good example of this is we've seen surveys where students admit to using AI for academic purposes have varied from 22% of students say that they are, all the way to 89% of students say that they are. It's probably more toward the upper end of that, but students, again, are making probably wise decisions depending on the context within which they are. But I think you need to know more about the student lived experience with AI. And so maybe it's not a focus group where we say, all right, I want to begin by asking, how many of you are cheating with AI? But rather, hey, so how is AI helping you with your college life? Like how are you using this maybe as a productivity tool, and then kind of ease into conversations? Maybe it's not you. Maybe how do you know your friends are using it? So don't share how you're using, but don't give any names, don't give any classes, but how are your friends using it? I think there's it can give you a snapshot to better understand what the lived culture with AI is among students within your courses or on your institution or within your department or program. So I think having a better sense, I used to say that 10 national surveys, they're equal to one survey in your local population, So having data from your own context, and then that can help you make clearer decisions regarding what strategies you might employ. I mean, there was a conversation in the fall around AI resistant assignments. So like, let's design assignments so that students can't use AI. And we took some of those examples as we were finishing up the book, and we had student focus groups, and we shared this notion of AI resistant assignments, and we shared them with students. And they were like, oh, I know how I could do this with AI. And I was like, could you show me? And then like 90 seconds later, they had 2 drafts of things, and they asked for a poor version and then a better version. And then they talked about, how are these different? Basically had AI do every step of the process to a way that something was very interestingly, significantly problematized. So I think ultimately, we all know that cheating has existed forever, and that there are a small percentage of students that are always going to cheat, given the opportunity. But if you think about why do students cheat, it's, well, they have the opportunity, but they also are under some sort of duress, like they don't have enough time or they don't know how to do the work. So I think if we can kind of normalize getting help or assistance, have easy paths for getting help, that helps with a piece of that. But let's say that you have 5 writing assignments due in your class. What if instead of all 5 being due at midnight on Sunday, what if students could select 3 where they could get a 2-day extension, no questions asked? So 5 assignments, you can take 3 of them and get that extension. Well, students that choose to do that will probably have very busy lives. There's reasons why they would choose to do that. They would be then, hey, I'll take the extra 2 days. That means I'm less likely to cheat. And then I'm actually more likely to do the work, which is when the learning takes place. I mean, indeed, every assessment we give our students, whether it's writing a paper or taking a multiple choice test, every assessment is an act of pedagogy. So if we give students a couple of extra days so that they do the work, then they're going to actually learn the material. So there's multiple benefits to having some flexibility, such as allowing students to have a couple of extra days, or to just make it clear how students can receive help. And probably also Sunday night deadlines aren't a great one, because students are going to work on things on the weekend when literally every service on campus is most likely closed. So there's just multiple things structurally, just little nudges that we can do, that those 3 students that may have cheated, well, maybe now that they could ask for the extension, maybe none of them would choose to use AI to actually do the work. And now they're actually going to spend the next 48 hours struggling to complete the task as best they can. There's nuances like that that we certainly should adopt.
I think that lends nicely to another question that Scarlett posed before the webinar. Is around Bloom's taxonomy. She asks, is there any level yet that AI cannot replicate effectively, allowing a student to avoid actual learning? If so, how can educators leverage assignments that will evoke those upper levels of Bloom's while still helping students to understand the basics?
Yeah, so I don't know that I would say that there are any level of Bloom's. So for those of you that aren't familiar, it's like a pyramid, and it's like lower level learning outcomes are kind of easier to teach to, like memorization or just simple understanding, where at the top of the pyramid, like the higher order learning outcomes that you really need in the real world and you need in the world of work, are things like being able to analyze or to evaluate, make quality judgments of things, or to create your own content. That's at the the very top. So, I mean, depending on the discipline and the task, AI has varying abilities associated. And it does, I think that as experts look at the quality of content produced for higher order learning outcomes, sometimes it hits the mark and sometimes it doesn't. But without a doubt, as you push higher on Bloom's taxonomy from a learning outcomes perspective, and if you aspire for those and provide some flexibility within the assignment where students actually see themselves in it. So, okay, I want you to analyze a current business strategy for a nonprofit that you care about. You know, if it's something that students care about, like, you know, I really SPCA or something like that, and you want to dive into that, well, students less likely to cheat if it's something that they care about. So, I mean, there are things that you can do that can further encourage students to want to engage in the work, but then also you're pushing them on higher order learning outcomes, which helps to build durable, transferable skills. I mean, for a long time, prior to AI, one of the complaints about new graduates is that they have difficulty transferring the fairly organized information that we provided them whenever they were in college, transferring that to ill-structured real-world problems. So having opportunities for students to do things that mirror the real world, like experiential learning, like undergraduate research or doing service learning or projects within the community, it's more of a challenge to have AI do all of it, without a doubt. There's pieces that humans have to, you know, you can't send your laptop, you know, over to the SPCA for you. So there's just a lot of ways to kind of make things more complex, make things more interesting for students, push them toward higher order learning outcomes. But, and I always stop short. I wasn't stopping short about the notion of AI resistance. As Jose and I were writing the book, we were both kind of there until we put some of those assignments in front of students and then had more complicated conversations with them. But it's clear that the student who is motivated to cheat and is a power user of AI can do a lot of tasks. So it behooves us to, without a doubt, especially at the junior and senior level, to be pushing higher on Bloom's taxonomy, but also provide real world opportunities to do the work and to let students have some agency about what that assignment or project might look like. Just it makes it more difficult to use AI. Plus, students will want to do the work because they're doing things that they themselves have selected to do that they care about.
As Jenny mentioned, we got a ton of great questions, so thank you to the audience. We have time for one more before the top of the hour. I like your perspective on this question, both of your perspectives. I'll start with Jenny, but Minashki asked, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I just thought this was a provocative way to end. How can we use AI in a way that allows us to remain true to our own voice instead of everyone starting to speak the same AI insipid language?
I love that. I love that when I'm on Grammarly. So this is my response, that Grammarly has learned a lot about who I am, how I like to say things. The suggestions that they give me are contextually relevant to the work that I'm doing, whether it's a professional draft to my boss or it's an email to some of my college friends. It's recommending efficiencies for me based on the outcome of the content. And so I would encourage everyone who hasn't seen, if you haven't seen Grammarly in the last 6 months, you haven't seen Grammarly. And the other thing too is as it relates to our own voice, part of that voice is the willingness to keep Gen AI functionality, protected to some degree. If you really need students to develop their voice before understanding what is a good recommendation from the AI, we have that flexibility too as well. I know we mentioned it before, but a lot of my experience within Grammarly is thinking about my thinking and allows me to really understand it. The reflection that I do as a writer is 10x when I'm in the space that I'm using Grammarly versus, without. So there's a world now I can't even imagine not having Grammarly with me. And I say that from a professional lens. But yeah, Eddie, what are your thoughts?
I have a whole bunch. I'm trying to summarize real quick to some, I guess, key thoughts. I mean, like back to my letter writing example. there are times where you really want your voice present, but I think, if a lot of people who are department heads or are in leadership positions, you might have an assistant who would write a draft for you, and then you would just edit and make some changes. I think that having AI do a draft is pretty much the same thing, where you can ensure that your voice is there. But there are times where, I care less about my voice, I think, and there are times where I care about it deeply. In fact, as a first generation college student from Appalachia, I have found that there was a time where I tried to write away from that voice that, I grew up with. And now I'm trying to kind of find myself back to it. And actually, I've been, for about the past month, I've been playing with Grammarly, and it's made me far more aware of sort of like nuances that maybe I do or I don't want in my voice. Like I write, just because of where I'm from, the passive voice and sentence structure. That's kind of how I write. So I'm now making choices like, oh, for this note to a colleague, I'm happy to continue to be Eddie from Virginia. And then there's other times where I need this to be more professional. So I think a lot of us do a lot of code switching. You speak in a certain voice in a certain context, and there's times where it's more important or less important. So I think that's part of what AI literacy is for us in the future, is recognizing that there's a matrix, a calculus regarding when it's important for us to have our voice in a certain way and when it isn't. And I think some of these technologies are helping us see that, making transparent to us, like, this is what you're doing. Do you want to do that in this letter to the president of this university? Do you want to do this in this email to a colleague or a student? So I feel it's empowering and enables us more choice. And also enables us to go, it doesn't matter right now. I don't care about voice. I care about getting this done. Like I had someone ask me for a letter of support for a grant. And I was like, sure, I can do that. When do you need it? They said tomorrow. So for me, it was more important to get it done and to have dinner with my family rather than to hold on to, so again, I think it's really a matrix, and there's a lot of decision cells that we're in as we think through why and when we would want to maintain our certain identity.
So you're maintaining a position of complete control, knowing that you've got the flexibility to use the tool in a way that enhances you based on your own judgment every day. So I love that. I know we're wrapping up here. Just another plug for Eddie and his team at AAC and U. If you would like to learn more about AI pedagogy and innovative curriculum, please do apply. It looks like you guys have up 6 days to get your teams together. And I want to thank everybody. Eddie, I really want to thank you for the conversation. Spoiler alert, I'd love a part 2 with you maybe here coming up. So everybody look for that. And everybody, thanks for coming. Have a wonderful day. And here's to some summer innovation around curriculum. Cheers.